talk about what's happened in Brazil. And, I interviewed Greenwald on my show. This reporting is stunning. And, I've reviewed this case on this show. It obviously means a lot to me, and it's very nice to have this reporting mean that more people are catching up on it because it is really important. It is really important that we have the world's most prominent political prisoner in the world sitting in a jail cell in the world's fifth largest economy and the largest economy and country in Latin America, and that there is almost undoubtedly a U.S. Justice Department role in it. That matters. And I think it also matters more broadly because it goes to the heart of why we, A, need to put foreign policy back on the table in terms of conversation, and particularly U.S. interference in Latin America, and B, because a simplistic one-dimensional rhetoric about quote-unquote corruption has been proven quite amply to only benefit far-right authoritarian leaders like Donald Trump, Drain the Swamp, or J.R. Bolsonaro, or Orban, or Putin, or Duterte, or Modi, or even Netanyahu, hilariously enough. But I'll just touch on briefly. The releases from The Intercept keep growing and growing and growing in terms of just the stunning corruption and politicization of the prosecutorial team that went after Lula. They maintained publicly the whole time that they weren't political, that they didn't have an interest in the outcome of the race. And the fact that Judge Sergio Moro, who was sort of served this odd dual judge prosecutor position, took a position as Jair Bolsonaro's justice minister, that should have been enough for every single person in media and people with any progressive political bona fides to immediately reject. And along with the fact that the case against Lula was threadbare and relied on compelled testimony of one person, that should have been enough. But now these documents are endlessly filling it in. And I'll just highlight a few things. So one, of course, contrary to their public position, they were actually hugely invested in the outcome to the point where Judge Sergio Moro collaborated with and secretly coordinated a mapped strategy with the lead prosecutor in a way that I think is absolutely illegal and totally unethical. So he would plan when to go on raids. He would help them rewrite briefs so they were stronger. There was work to undermine Lula's ability to do an interview, even after they had already jailed him in this political way. And the other really significant thing was the case he was convicted on. The prosecutors themselves, the lead prosecutor, Delton Daligan, says in one of these things, basically he's like, he's basically saying, apart from this item, I am apprehensive about the connection between Petrobras and the enrichment. The enrichment is supposedly what they convicted him on was that not even for getting an apartment, actually, it was for getting improvements on an apartment. So this is him talking about that case. Petrobras and the enrichment. After they told me I'm apprehensive about the apartment story, he wrote in a group Telegram chat with his colleagues on September 9th, 2009, 4 days before filing their indictment against Lula. These are points at which we have to have solid answers on the tips of our tongues. None of his subordinates responded to his messages in the materials examined in this article. So 4 days before indicting a former two-term president, a national icon who brought tens of millions out of poverty, he's saying to his own prosecutorial team, what we're about to charge him with seems pretty weak and not related to the case. Now, there's new revelations on at least one Supreme Court justice that have come out, and an endless amount of stuff really revealing the corruption and just utter disgustingness of Judge Sergio Moro. And Bernie Sanders finally and thankfully has come out and said, I stand with political and social leaders across the globe who are calling on Brazil's judiciary to release Lula and annul his conviction. The 2018 elections are completely illegitimate. Lula led in all polls and was jailed in this totally corrupt and political way. And I have to say, don't take politicians' words for it, but I played this on my show before Lula was put in prison in this grotesque farce of Sergio Moro and Lava Jato. And it is worthwhile to listen to credible foreign leaders, particularly when they're incredibly successful progressive presidents. Here is Lula da Silva speaking with Amy Goodman last spring, a couple of weeks before he is put in solitary confinement on these ridiculous charges and kept from being elected as Brazil's president, which he almost certainly would have been.
We are awaiting the accusers, for the accusers to show at least some piece of evidence that indicates that I committed any crime during the period that I was in the presidency. Now, what is behind that is the attempt to criminalize my political party. What is behind that is the interest in a part of the political elite of Brazil, together with a part of the press, reinforced by the role of the judiciary in preventing Lula from becoming a candidate in the 2018 elections. And I continue challenging the federal police, the Office of the Attorney General. I continue challenging Judge Moro and the appellate court to show the world and to show Brazil a single piece of evidence of a crime committed by me. The behavior of the judiciary in this instance is a political form of behavior.
That's absolutely right. All of the reporting validates this 100%. And I will say, look forward, because this team of prosecutors and Sergio Moro are so political, right-wing, and unethical. They were illegally tapping Lula's phones. They released distorted phone conversations to embarrass people and so on, going back years. So I'm sure they will respond with more dirty tricks and propaganda. He's a political prisoner. He needs to be freed now. And we need to look at this very seriously, just really briefly from the Intercept. A probe, however, is also the probe. This is the car wash prosecution, has been accused of political bias, repeated violations of constitutional guarantees, and illegal leaks of information to the press. A separate article published today by Intercept reveals that the car wash prosecutors, who long insisted they were apolitical and concerned solely with fighting corruption, were in fact internally plotting how to prevent the return of power by Lula and his Workers' Party. So this reporting is incredibly crucial because, first and foremost, he's a political prisoner. He needs to be free. Brazil didn't have real 2018 elections. Corruption as a discourse favors the right, and we need to understand how to talk about it properly and in capitalist and oligarchic terms. And then also because the U.S. media still to this day has covered this case in an incredibly biased way, which has elevated these right-wing hack prosecutors and repeated their propaganda and lies about Lula. And it wasn't just the New York Times, the Guardian, the Washington Post, and so on who did horrific jobs on this. And you need to be reading Brazil Wire and, of course, the reports of the Intercept. It was even some quote-unquote progressive sources.
Wow.
That's kind of, I don't know, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I want to get a Lava Jato t-shirt.
Yep. I don't know if anybody else wants a. I'm gonna pass on the Lava Jato t-shirt, particularly if you're talking about another country. It's your obligation, particularly if you're on the left. Why don't you seek out real left-wing sources in that country? Because even the ones in Brazil that were much more critical of PT would have told you that the process against against Dilma Rousseff was a coup, and that the prosecution of Lula was totally politically motivated. And so you have, almost certainly with some direction and support of the U.S. Department of Justice, a social democratic government that refused to privatize key geostrategic assets, that lifted tens of millions out of poverty, built hundreds of new universities, made incredible gains in public health, criminalized, and now a fascist is in power. And part of the handmaiden of all of that is just repeating corruption problem.
I feel proud of myself about that.
I mean, look, it's a problem. You got to understand, what is the difference between someone working within the confines of a corrupt political system to deliver for human beings versus taking $10 million and putting it in a Swiss bank account? It's a fundamentally different thing. And even in the United States, I would never compare Hillary Clinton to Lula. It would be a profound insult to Lula. Democratic Party has accomplished nothing compared to what the Workers' Party has accomplished. But that being said, how did we get into a situation where a guy who is corruption itself is running around talking about drain the swamp. And then Hillary Clinton, who absolutely was involved in what I would call structural corruption, she gets teared as the corrupt one, which she is part of the corruption of our system, against the guy who like literally has endless accusations of that. You need to be able to make these distinctions and think intelligently about it. And ironically, the other horrifying thing about Brazil is that what happened to Lula is what Trump is always lying about and freaking out is going to happen to him, right? I'm being persecuted by the deep state. Lula basically was lawfare by the Brazilian political class to criminalize him and his party, lie about him, make him a political prisoner. And then on the other hand, Donald Trump quite clearly would love to be able to do what these people have done to Lula, to Hillary Clinton, to Barack Obama. So there's a lesson on both ends of this here. You need to, Ro Khanna released a statement, Bernie Sanders released a statement. You need to go praise them both, and then you need to go and flood everybody else with a pretension of progressive leadership. They should have done it months ago, and today, after these revelations that not every single, forget even progressive Democrat, hasn't come out and demanded his release is stunning. And I'm including that on a spectrum of everybody from a guy like Beto O'Rourke, who likes to pretend he's in tune with things, to at the very least, I mean, my God, I'm always being told about what an anti-imperialist Tulsi Gabbard is. She hasn't even signed any of the Lula letters to begin with.
I'm suspect of that.
I am.
This is that to me, this is red flaggy all over the place.
That's exactly how I'd put it. And another great example to show that Elizabeth Warren has no global solidarity, has no understanding of international affairs, from a non-interventionist and a real critique of U.S. foreign policy perspective. And of course, AOC, profoundly disappointing, and no speed, from Grijalva or other leaders. It's just incredible.